name's Abigail and I'm here to tell you a true story about some spies. Now our story is from the Bible, and if you want to find it for yourself, it's in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. Our spies are from the nation of Israel, who we've been learning about for the last couple of weeks. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt, but God rescued them. It was all very dramatic. The Israelites thought they wouldn't get away. But God created a path of dry land right through the middle of the sea so that they could escape. Wow. Then the Israelites camped out in the desert, which they didn't like very much, but God continued to look after them. He made sure that they had enough food and enough water, even in the desert. The Israelites were God's special people, and He gave them lots of instructions to help them live as His people. He also gave them lots of wonderful promises. Now we know, just like the Israelites, that God always keeps His promises. But sometimes, just like us, the Israelites forgot to trust God's promises. Listen out in the story and see if you can spot where this happens. Now, I said that the Israelites had been camping in the desert. Now they couldn't stay there forever, could they? Where were they going to go? Well, God had made them a promise. Back when the people were still slaves in Egypt, God had made them this promise. He said, "I have promised to bring you out of your misery in Egypt, into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey." Now, there are quite a lot of funny names in that, but don't worry just now, we'll get to that in a minute. Did you notice that there were two things that God promised just there? The first was that God would rescue His people from slavery in Egypt. He's done that already. Amazing. The Israelites have seen that God does what He says. God always keeps His promises. Now the second thing that God had promised was that He would give the Israelites a new land to live in, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now that sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? What does that mean? Well, it means the land was great for producing all sorts of wonderful food. Now the land belonged to some other people, the groups of people whose funny names we saw in this promise God gave. These people were evil and disobeyed God, and so God had said He would give their land to His people, the Israelites, instead. He promised this: "I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites." All those people God was going to drive out before the Israelites. The Israelites would have to fight them, but God had promised that they would win. And God always keeps His promises. The people had been camping in the desert for a long time now, more than a year, but now it was time to start the journey to the new land God had promised them. Can you imagine how they were feeling? Maybe you know the feeling of looking forward to a really fantastic holiday. When the day finally arrives to get in the car and to travel to your holiday, you are so excited. The Israelites were on the move, and they must have been buzzing. God said to Moses, who was leading the people, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites." So, Moses chose 12 men, one from each of the 12 tribes or big families of Israel, to be spies. What do you imagine when you think of spies? Maybe you think of super cool gadgets. Yes. Maybe you think of really sneaky disguises. Well, these men wouldn't have had any gadgets. Maybe they did have disguises. We don't know. But they did have the most important thing any spy needs: a mission. Now, in Numbers chapter 13, verses 17 to 20, Moses gives the spies their mission. Listen as I read the verses and see if you can spot the 3 main things they need to find out. Go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. Their mission was to investigate 3 main things about the land. First of all, the people. How many people live there? How strong are they? Next of all, the towns. How well defended are they? Do they have big walls around them or are they easy to get into? And lastly, the soil. Oops. Is it good for growing things? Now, God had already promised that the Israelites would be able to win the land, but the spies were sent ahead so the people knew exactly what to expect when they arrived. Well, the men spent 40 days exploring the land, and they took back to the people some of the fruit that they found there. They found figs and pomegranates and some grapes as well. In fact, one of the bunches of grapes they found was so large that 2 of the spies had to carry it between them on a pole. Well, when they got back to camp, everyone gathered around to hear what they had to say. What had they found out? Well, Numbers 13 verse 27 tells us what the spies said. We went to the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Look, here is its fruit. Amazing! The land is just as wonderful as God had promised. The spies carried on talking. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. Defeating these cities could be tricky. They're very strong, and the descendants of Anak, who were known for being very, very tall, live there. But God had said that the Israelites would be able to defeat the people who lived in the land. So one of the spies, a man called Caleb, said this: "We should go and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But 10 of the spies didn't agree. In the next bit of the Bible passage, they say this: "We can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report all about the land that they explored. They said this: "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people that we saw are of great size." Oh dear. What had these spies forgotten? God always keeps his promises. The Israelites listened to the bad spies, and they grumbled against Moses and against God. They said some terrible things. They said things like this: "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Caleb and one of the other spies, a man called Joshua, tried to persuade the people. They said, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." But it was no good. The people were too afraid, and they didn't trust God to keep his promises. Sometimes we can be afraid too. scary or difficult things happen in our lives, but God has made promises for us too. If we ask God to forgive us when we disobey him, if we ask God to make us one of his special people and help us to live his way, then he has promised that we will go to heaven, which is far, far better even than the wonderful land that God promised to the Israelites back in the Old Testament. Things may be hard on the way, but God always keeps his promises, and we just have to trust him. If we don't, we won't be allowed to enter God's incredible kingdom of heaven, which he has prepared for his people. Sadly, this is exactly what happened to the Israelites when they didn't trust God. God was angry, and he said this to his people through Moses: "Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun." Remember, these were the two good spies. "As for your children," God said, "as your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them into the land to enjoy it, the land that you have rejected." The people hadn't trusted God to keep his promises, and so God never let them enter the good land that he had prepared for them. Instead, the people lived in the desert for 40 years, until all of the adults who had grumbled against God had died. God kept his promise, and eventually all of the Israelites who were children or who hadn't been born when the spies went on their mission went into the land that God had promised them, and he helped them to defeat the people living there, just as he'd said. The Israelites learned a very important lesson, which I hope you will remember too. We must trust God because he always keeps his promises.